Hello, and welcome to the Joy of Painting Middle-earth. I'm Timbo Took, and this is a time when we come together to paint the most fantastic landscapes Middle-earth has to offer. Now, as I explained last week, I've been off doing a bit of adventuring myself, so I haven't been at home in my own Hobbit hole, where I have everything to create my Joy of Painting Middle-earth paintings like we usually do. But I've improvised a little bit. I went out and I bought this acrylic paint set. Now, I don't have much experience with acrylic paints, and so I'm doing a bit of learning as we go. I thank you for your patience, and I hope you enjoy this painting. And as I did last week, as I do the painting, I've sped it up a bit so it's a little bit faster. And also I thought we'd read some of The Hobbit together, the story that's inspired me to do these paintings. That's right, and as I did last week, I read from Chapter 1, An Unexpected Party, and I thought I would pick up where I left off. And you'll see as this week's painting goes along. I did make my own green because the paint set I bought didn't have green, and that's kind of important when you're painting the Shire. But you'll see, last week we did a painting of Bag End from far off. And this week, we come in a little closer so you can see the door and see what it looks like up close. So, again, I'm just sort of learning with these acrylic paints. I normally paint with oils, which I have just a fair more experience with. So, as I did last week, I read from the first chapter of The Hobbit, An Unexpected Party. And I thought I'd pick up where we left off, because we left off at a pretty good part, right where Gandalf enters. So, as we said, Bilbo was sitting in front of his hobbit hole, smoking his pipe, when Gandalf came by. That's right, Gandalf. If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard a very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place, wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way, under the hill, for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died. In fact, the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, a silver scarf over which his white beard hung below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green, but Gandalf looked at him from under long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo. "And a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry. We have all day before us." Then Bilbo sat on the seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful gray ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf. "But I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone." "Well, I should think so in these parts. We are plain, quiet folk, and have no use for adventures, nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them," said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort, and wanted him to go away, but the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the Hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this he meant that the conversation was at an end.
"What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good till I move off."
Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name."
Yes, yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins. And you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think I should have lived to be good-morninged by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door."
Gandalf, good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered? Not the fellow who used to tell such wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants, and the rescue of princesses and of unexpected luck of widows' sons? Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks? Oh, I remember those. Old Took used to have them on Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like great lilies and snapdragons and laburnums of fire, and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not quite so prosy as he liked to believe. Also, that he was very fond of flowers. "Dear me," he went on, "not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lassies going off into the blue for mad adventures? Anything from climbing trees to visiting elves, or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, but I had no idea you were still in business."
"Where else should I be?" said the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for."
I beg your pardon. I haven't asked for anything."
"Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go so far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too, very likely, if you get over it."
"Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea any time you like. Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye." With that, the Hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Wizards, after all, are wizards. "What on earth did I ask him to tea for?" he said to himself as he went into the pantry. He had only had just a little breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink of something would do him good after his fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still standing outside the door, and laughing long but quietly. After a while, he stepped up, and with the spike on his staff, scratched a queer sign on the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he had escaped adventures very well. The next day, he had almost forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this: Gandalf, tea, Wednesday. Yesterday, he had been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell. And then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle and put out another cup and saucer, and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under a dark hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and
"Dwalin at your service,"
he said with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins, at yours," said the Hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he added, I am just about to take tea. Pray, come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung things up in your hall without a word of explanation? They had not been at table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the Hobbit, and off he went to the door. "So you have got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step, with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he, too, hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he had been invited.
"I see they have begun to arrive already," he said when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up.
He hung his red one next to it, and
"Balin, at your service,"
he said, with his hand on his breast. "Thank you," Bilbo said with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty and stuck to it however painful. He might have to go without. "Come along in and have some tea," he managed to say, after taking a deep breath. "Okay, there we go. All right, well, as I come to the end of this painting, I hope you've enjoyed my reading of The Hobbit. And I hope you've enjoyed this painting. Of course, as I said before, we will get back to our normal paintings that we usually do, out in the fields with the goats and the sheeps and things, or even in my hobbit hole. But again, I hope you've appreciated my attempt at acrylic painting. I hope to get more practice at this, and I appreciate everybody who commented on last week's painting. I even had a friend of the show, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly, Nadir Rancho, who is an acrylic painter as well, and made a few suggestions to me for things like the clouds, and I do believe they turned out pretty good this time, although I didn't spend much time on my clouds because I wanted to get just to the details of the Hobbit hole. So, as I said, this painting was done just while I was out adventuring. I bought a set of acrylic paints while I was on the road, and we were able to do this painting together. Now, next week, I plan to be back in the Hobbit hole and have a great, fantastic episode for you. In fact, we may even go back to one of our earlier paintings and show how we take it and add details to add depth and color and darkness and lightness into the painting. So that one will be quite fun, and you will be able to see that even if you're finished with a painting, you can always go back and tinker with it. It's your world. You're creating it. Why not? So, as we do this and we finish up together, as I said, thank you for joining me again. Thank you for supporting this little show. I'll be back next week with another painting. Goodbye and God bless.